Okay, so good morning or afternoon. Our next lesson is going to be on the Persian Empire. So that just get a shape of the geography, their Indo-Europeans first migrated to the Fertile Crescent around 1000 BCE. So if you're like me, you're probably wondering, we've talked about them, what are or who are Indo-Europeans? Well, Indo-Europeans are people that lived in an area that we now call Eastern Europe and Central Asia, areas around the Ukrainian steppes, around the Caspian Sea. So they spread from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, countries now known as Iran, great farmland, lots of minerals. They had gold, silver, lead, copper, and lapis lazuli, which is, never heard of that before I started teaching world history. Lapis lazuli is also known as lapis. It's a deep blue rock used as a gemstone. It's not a mineral like other gems. It's a rock, but it looks like a mineral and looks like a gem. And they're very popular. And they had strong trading abilities from this area. So in the beginning, initially the region was ruled by many small kingdoms. Remember, we saw in Mesopotamia, they had kingdoms all over the place. So over time, two major powers emerged, the Medes and the Persians. So we're going to worry today about the rise of Persia. So the Assyrian Empire was overthrown in 612 BCE. Persia began to conquer other kingdoms. They dominated Medes and created an empire. And the capital of that empire is down here, and it's called Persepolis.
Here we have the capital city of Persepolis, and it was actually built on a platform. You can see it in these two pictures here. It was built on these platforms because of the seismic activity in this area. They were afraid of earthquakes knocking down their temples, and over here we've got our pillars. Okay, so it was a planned city. As far as artwork goes, we see artwork that we've seen from the Assyrians and the Chaldeans. We've got the face of a man, the wings of an eagle, and the body of a lion. And over here, a lion, much like the Assyrians had done in their artwork. So we have a lot of cultural diffusion. These empires that rise up and take over these lands take a lot of ideas from each other.
So the first great ruler here was Cyrus the Great. Cyrus took over in 550 BC, started to conquer several neighboring kingdoms. Cyrus was a military genius at the time. Under his rule, the empire stretched 2,000 miles from India to Anatolia, which, if you remember, Anatolia is part of the Turkey area.
Cyrus was most known for ruling with kindness, and he gave people in his empire a level of religious tolerance that we hadn't seen before. When he captured a city, he didn't burn it down or loot it. Most leaders let their soldiers loot cities, and that was in part to pay for the service of their soldiers. And he wouldn't do that. He didn't let his soldiers loot and take from these cities. He would honor local customs. And one of the things he might even do would be to go to the temple of this conquered city and kneel in front of their gods. Now, this might have just been a gesture to try to get the people behind him, but he was showing that he was tolerant towards other religions. Cyrus was known for allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem. Now, at this point in history, the Jews had been taken as slaves back to the city of Babylon under the Chaldean Empire. When the Persians beat the Chaldeans, under Cyrus, the Persians let the Jews return to their homeland. So he's actually mentioned in the Torah, the Jewish holy book, as an anointed one. Okay, a very important figure. Cyrus would die in 530 BCE during a battle with nomadic invaders, and at that point his son Cambyses would take over. So here we have the tomb of Cyrus, and when you look at it, compare it to other tombs that we've seen before, like the Great Pyramids of Egypt or the tomb of Qin Shi Huangdi in China. Compared to those tombs, the tomb of Cyrus is very simple. And he didn't want to spend his empire's money on such an extravagant tomb. He wanted them to be successful after his death.
And under Cambyses, Cyrus' son takes over the throne and continues to expand the empire. Now, one thing we should go back to Cyrus just for a second to know about is that Cyrus was very organized, and he named captured peoples to head their own states. He even used Babylonian, Egyptian, and Assyrian designs for some of his buildings. So when Cambyses takes over, he continues to expand the empire, and he included the land of Egypt at this point. He captured Egypt. He wasn't quite as nice as his father, though, and he didn't share his father's kindness and religious tolerance, and he persecuted the Egyptians. He died 8 years after taking the throne, leaving the Persian Empire very weak and fragile. No one's sure how he died. He might have been assassinated by Darius, who was the next ruler, or another wannabe ruler. Could have been suicide, or he died from a wound, had gangrene in the wound, and died from an infection. So take a close look at this picture. And this is a picture of a soldier, and they're invading Egypt. So what do you see in the picture that are being thrown around? I'll give you 10 seconds to hit the chat up for that. Well, if you said cats, you were correct. Because realizing how much Egyptians loved their cats, Cambyses used them as shields and weapons. And the Egyptians, who didn't want to hurt the cats, surrendered the city to him. So here's a picture of Cambyses conquering Egypt and the Pharaoh. You don't see any cats in the picture here. So Darius began his career as a bodyguard to the king. He seized the throne in 522 BCE with the help of 10,000 immortals. Now these immortals were soldiers. He had 10,000 cavalry and he had 10,000 infantry. And they were called immortals because if one fell in battle, they were immediately replaced with another. So in theory, he never had less than 10,000 of each ready to go at each time. So he spent the first 3 years of his reign putting down revolts, and then he spent several more years establishing an organized government. So his government empire was divided into 20 provinces. These provinces were called satrapies, and they were similar to the different homelands of their conquered people. So he had 20 of these satrapies, and he allowed the conquered people to keep the religion, the laws, and the language. And in each of these provinces, or satrapies, he appointed a satrap, or a local governor, that were in charge of the military and of the tax collections. He sent out inspectors called King's Eyes and Ears, who made sure that these officials were loyal. So the Royal Road was something that Darius also built which expedited communication and trade. It ran from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Anatolia. It was 1,677 miles of road, and for the messengers to go across these miles, it took only 7 days. Kind of hard to believe that you could get that far in 7 days, but they had fast horses and they had relay stations every 15 miles where the riders could rest, they could eat, they could switch horses, get a fresh horse, and keep on going. And it became a central trade route for the whole empire. So his legacy was, Darius, to expand the empire to include modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and parts of India. His only failure was his inability to conquer Greece. And we'll learn about the Persian Wars in a few weeks. He borrows the concept of coined money from the Lydians, and trade flourishes. He actually simplified trade. It was much easier to trade using coins because they didn't have to trade their goods and then take other goods back with them. They could go back with just the coins. But he died before he attempted another Greek invasion. So that was his failure, that he never could conquer Greece.
So here we have the map of the Persian Empire. And when we look at it, we notice that they have conquered 3 of our ancient river valley civilizations. We've got Egypt, we've got Mesopotamia, and we've even got the Indus River, which is the only river valley civilization the Persians didn't conquer. And you should be thinking China. Now, when we look at this map, we can see the Royal Road going all the way from the Persian heartland of Persepolis all the way up to Sardis near the Mediterranean Sea. We'll see another map that looks a lot like this, and you'll need to know the difference between the maps. We know this is the Persian Empire because they failed to conquer Greece. But we'll see another map later on, and it includes Greece along with all of the lands of the Persian Empire. And that would be Alexander the Great's empire. And the SOL likes to be a little tricky sometimes, and it'll show you one of these maps, and it'll ask, is it Alexander's map or the Persian Empire map? And you'll need to know that if it shows Greece as part of the empire, it's Alexander's map. But if it does not show Greece, if Greece has not been conquered, it's the map of the Persian Empire. Here we have the tombs of Darius and Xerxes, and we can tell that these tombs are much more grand than that of Cyrus the Great.
The religion that the Persians had was named after a prophet. The prophet was Zoroaster, and he lived around 600 BCE. His key teachings were the earth is a battleground between good and evil. They had a belief in only one God, so they were monotheistic. And the God was named Ahura Mazda. And everyone will eventually be judged based on how well they fought for good. Not a bad thing. So the legacy was a religion is still practiced today in parts of Iran and India. Traces of this religion can be found in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They have a concept of Satan. They have a concept of angels. And the fact that it's still around is a pretty good legacy.
So if you ever find yourself in Iran or certain parts of India, and you come across a structure that looks like this. This would be a Zoroastrian temple. And below we see the symbol for Zoroastrianism. Now, the symbol actually has nothing to do with Zoroastrianism, but it was taken and used as a symbol for this religion from older Mesopotamians. And the person in the middle is actually the god Ashur. But we still see it used today by those who consider themselves Persian. We also see it as the symbol for Zoroastrianism. And in fact, I was visiting a cemetery with my family a few years ago around Christmas time. And we were looking for some of our relatives, older ones. We didn't really know where their grave markers were. And we came across a pretty large section, and all of the grave markings had the symbol from Zoroastrianism on the markers, and none of my family knew what it meant except for me, and I got to explain what the Zoroastrians were, and they all thought I was pretty smart. So it's one of the best reasons to study history. You get a lot of trivia out of it. Although the Zoroastrians weren't the first monotheistic people, they're going to be important because their ideas do spread to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we'll be covering Judaism a little bit later this unit.
So that concludes the slides, but I do want to add something that I missed in the slides a minute ago. And that is about the people that succeeded Darius. So when Darius died, the kings became very isolated. They were heavily taxing people. Loyalty began to disappear in the empire. And there were a lot of struggles for the throne. And the monarchy was weakened. Remember, these people could have, the kings or queens, they had it too as well. You could have been a king or a queen. And one of the big problems was that the kings were polygamous, which means they had more than one wife. One of the kings, Artaxerxes, I believe is how you say his name, he had 115 sons. Who knows how many daughters he had, but he had 115 sons. So there were many plots to overthrow the kings. And one of the rulers after Darius, there were 9 rulers, and 6 of those rulers were killed as a result of fighting for other people who wanted to be king. So in 330 BC, the kingdom's pretty weakened, and Alexander the Great came through from Greece, and he conquered the whole empire for Greece. So poor Darius, who wanted to conquer Greece, died, and the people that were left to defend the empire were taken over by Greece. So next class, we're going to look at trading peoples, the Minoans, the Phoenicians, the Arameans, and the Lydians. And that's it for today.